Marvel Snap team murdered my best card. Prime of his life, they smoted him with the dreaded foam blade. Spongy dart right to the head. They nerfed him. Ladies and gentlemen, in the middle of filming this video, after gathering all the footage and compiling the data, Marvel Snap updated Galactus. They killed him dead. Out of all the big bads in the current meta, he went from the best to the worst. I played over 100 games with this deck and was trying to bring you guys a comprehensive deck analysis on how good this deck was, and literally the day I finished these games, they sent out an update.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
So, now I have to redo the entire video, start from square one, and the original title of this video was going to be Galactus Meta Wins Games, but Isn't That Fun? Which was true, but now he doesn't even win games.
You're broken. I don't want to play with you anymore.
Listen, I think this game is really fun, but with a constant meta shift and balance updates, it's hard to find a deck that does really well. It devalues the collector's tokens that I spend and probably doesn't help with player retention. But what do we do now? I feel like I just got stabbed. I have all this footage, everything is written and edited. It's basically useless now. As an emerging content creator, when they do stuff like this, it really hurts and wastes my time and effort. If you can, like and sub to the video and the channel, so that would mean the world, as it shows that people are still here and support the channel. Andrew and I are working on a lot of different content for our podcasts, for our shorts, for our page on Instagram, TikTok, and all those different platforms, and constantly trying to stay up to date with things like Marvel, Star Wars, and Warhammer on the podcast as well. At the end of the day, we love this stuff. We love interacting with the community. We love celebrating our nerddom and finding common interests with people we wouldn't otherwise get to interact with. Seriously, you guys are all the best. If you have made it this far, you're the real one. Now, enjoy the rest of the video. We're going to get right into it. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Talk About Tatooine. My name's Nathan, and we are going over our third iteration of our research and development series. Today, we are talking about the Galactus Destroy deck. Now, in the title, you guys are going to see this is labeled as Galactus 1.3 because we had a few different iterations that we needed to try out, some different tweaks before we got this right and actually took this deck to infinite for our very first time. Let's dive right in. Let's start by breaking this deck down here, guys. Out of the 12 cards, we've got Nova, Yondu, Carnage, Wolverine, Scarlet Witch, Electro, Killmonger, Venom, Sabretooth, Shang-Chi, Null, and Galactus. This deck has an average cost breakdown of 3 energy with a power breakdown of 2.3. Using the destroy mechanic, this is going to ramp up quite a bit as we go through our rounds. We're going to dive right in by talking about our one-cost cards here, guys. Our first one on the platform is Nova. This is probably one of my favorite destroy cards because it does help spread that power very, very nicely. Then we've got Yondu as well. Weirdly enough, I feel like Yondu does a really good job at killing other people's Yondus as well, but sometimes this hits gold, hits a Hulk or something big to really help build your power boost at the end of the round. Then we get into our 2-cost cards here, guys. Scarlet Witch is probably one of my favorite cards to add into this deck. This deck was actually shown to me by a friend, and we added Scarlet Witch because this is really good for location control. Being able to take out other locations that are not desirable to you is very, very handy. We've got our second 2-cost card, which is Carnage. Honestly, it's a hard one not to include in this deck. For some reason, if you do get blocked at a location, you're not able to draw Scarlet Witch. Playing Carnage is really good for clearing the board and building some power. One of my favorite cards here is Wolverine. This is actually one of the cards that will win you rounds with this deck. 2 cost, 2 power, but it builds as you go through, especially if you're running into a location like a rickety bridge and you play Galactus and a Wolverine at the end. It's absolutely just a fun time, great ender. Really, your opponent should leave if they see you snap on that combination. But if they don't, hey, guess what? Take those cubes. Coming up next is our 3-cost cards. You guys are going to see 4 different ones here. We've got a lot of variety here. We've got Venom, Sabretooth, Electro, and Killmonger. Venom is probably one of my favorites, just being able to ramp up that power. Very, very nice. Then we have Sabretooth. If you can get this on the ground on turn 3, following it up by Electro in turn 4, Galactus turn 5, you have a huge chance of winning the round because Sabretooth is going to get returned to your hand for 0 cost. Hopefully you've got a Null in the hand to be able to play. You're going to be able to inch out those wins by a couple of points. Then obviously we have Electro. This is the Galactus play card. You have to have either Electro or Wave or something that is going to allow you to get that extra bit of energy so you can play Galactus turn 5 and then ramp that last lane to win those cubes. Killmonger's a pretty obvious addition because being able to clear those lanes, especially if something like Central Park shows up, really nice to open that up and get some points on the field. Coming up next here, guys, we have our 4-cost card. Really, this is a counter card that is almost crucial to have in every single one of my decks. We have Shang-Chi. Being able to play this on turn 6 is just absolutely dirty. It's one of my favorite things in the world. Got to keep it in there. Let's keep moving on. All right, you'll probably notice that we do not have any 5-cost cards, so we're moving right on to the 6-cost category. We have Null. This is going to be the card that wins you the game after you play Galactus, which is in that second spot. Now, Null is hopefully going to be able to ramp up as you destroy those other 2 locations. Now, keep in mind, this is a fairly predictable deck, which is why when we get into our win percentage, you're probably going to see a pretty average win rate, but it really did help as long as you can play your opponent better than they can play you. Then we've got our final one, Galactus here, guys. This is really what this whole deck is made for. Ideally, you're playing this on turn 5. Rarely you'll play this on turn 6, hoping that Wolverine will jump a couple of lanes, add some power, and really you're just taking a gamble to see if your opponent doesn't play anything on that lane. Getting into the deck stats, we had a win rate with this deck of 51%. Now, one of the things I also added in here was a Galactus play rate. I wanted to see how often we won, but I wanted to see also how often we actually played Galactus over the course of 100 games. So we won 51% of the time, but we only played Galactus 29% of the time. That means we played 71 games without playing Galactus, and we still achieved a really good win rate. And really, I think that's because this deck has 2 different ways to win. You can play Galactus, and you can destroy the other 2 locations and hope you can take that last one. Or you can play the general destroy route and hope that you can really ramp your power with cards like Carnage, Wolverine, Venom, Sabretooth, Shang-Chi, and then finally Null in that turn 6. All right, guys, so I want to clear up some of the stats that we have in here because this is going to help kind of break down this losses with Galactus. So overall, we won 51 games. We lost 46 games, and we actually ended up tying on 3 games. So that's just to keep that in there so all the numbers line up for you guys, so that will make sense. Now, out of those 46 losses, we played Galactus successfully 8 times. So throughout those 46 games, we were not able to get the turn order we needed to play Galactus. We only were able to play it 8 times, and so that was not overall very successful. Out of 100 games here, guys, we won 67 cubes, and our average cubes was 0.67. That's a kind of an easy piece of math to do because you just divide the number by 100, and you're going to get that average cubes right away. All right, guys, coming up next, we're going to go over some favorable locations. Last time we showed you guys this when we were playing our Destroy deck, we had quite a few different locations, and I wanted to actually break this down and simplify this for you and show you which locations we played well and how many games we won out of how many times we saw and against what decks they were being played. So our first one we'll go over is Death's Domain. So we won 3 out of 4 games, and those 3 wins were against a mixed deck, and you guys know this before. I've hopefully said this on episode 1 and 2, but I'll say it again. A mixed deck is really just a random assortment of cards. Most likely those are bot rounds, or they're just people playing out different deck compositions. It's really hard to know because you can't actually talk with your opponent. So any deck that doesn't have a really clear synergy, we just labeled as mixed. So keep that in mind. We also won against a Wong deck and another Destroy deck. Really fun. Then we're going to move over to our first 4 out of 4. We got Sinister London 4 different times, and we won every single time we saw Sinister London. Now, you guys will see that discard at the top. That has 3 asterisks, which is going to match over with the Hala location. Those are both the same deck. So when we see mixed with 2 asterisks and mixed with 2 asterisks on Death's Domain and Rickety Bridge, those are the same game. So it's kind of contributing to 2 different locations as far as win rate. We also won against a Hitmonkey deck, an ongoing deck, which we don't see too much of anymore, but it was really fun to play those, and we won against another Wong deck as well. Probably one of my favorite locations is Sinister London, just because it's super fun to be able to just like spread and ramp and multiply your power across those lanes, especially if you get to save one of those spots for a turn 6 null. Guys, that's a really fun play to put in there. Then we've got Rickety Bridge for our third favorable location. We saw this 3 different times and won 2 out of 3 games. One of those was against a discard deck, and one of them, as we mentioned before, was a mixed deck, while Death's Domain was in one of the other lanes as well. Moving on to location number 4, we actually saw Hala 6 different times, and we won 5 out of 6 of those rounds. This one had a really good spread of different cards, which was really fun to play. The first one is Rocks and Hawks. If you guys aren't familiar with that, make sure you guys go check out Cozy Snap. He does a lot of really cool videos, has a podcast, all that fun stuff, really goes into deep dives in all these different ones, and so we're actually going to be testing out more of those decks in the future. We're able to win against that deck, so that was really nice. As I mentioned before, we did get to play that discard round. As I mentioned before, we did get to play that same discard deck when Sinister London was on the field as well. We got another mixed deck. This was one of the first wins we also got with High Evo being played. That was really fun to get a few data points with that in there as well. And surprisingly enough, Sarah Control is a really common deck to play, and we actually got a win against that deck when playing on Hala. Location number 5 here, guys, is we have Muir Island. We saw this one come up 3 different times, and honestly, it was just really nice to be able to ramp those cards and then destroy them, adding a lot of extra power onto Null. We played one Control Destroy deck, which I thought was a very interesting mix, and then we also played a mixed deck as well, just again kind of random. And for the last one, this one surprised me here, guys. We didn't play this deck when the peak was a hot location just a few weeks ago. I actually made a specific deck for that, and that was super fun. But when we were doing our testing with our Galactus deck, we saw this twice. We saw a mixed deck, which we won, and we saw a control deck as well. Being able to play Galactus turn 2 was super nice, and then just following it up with Null for free, starting at 6 power. This was a really good play, and honestly a very fun match for me. Coming up next here, guys, we've got our non-favorable location. So I put another 6 locations up on the board here, and we're going to go over all of the locations we lost against, though the win percentage will be on top, and the decks that we lost against will be over there as well. Now, before we go through these, I'll kind of indicate what the different asterisks are going to mean. That one asterisk, which is over on Dark Dimension, is because this was a hot location while we were taking our data. Asterisk number 2 is where we have a control deck. This was played on the same game where we saw Dark Dimension and Sokovia, and asterisk 3, where we played a Sarah Bounce deck, and this was when Fisk Tower and Washington, D.C. were both on the field. All right, let's get into it. So Dark Dimension, we won 2 out of 7 times this came up. Again, we have a really big sample size for this one because it was a hot location. The rounds we lost was against a discard, Dino Moon, Destroy, control deck, and a mixed deck. That was a rough one to go through. Next, we have Sokovia. We only won 2 out of 5 games, and so the 3 rounds we lost was against a control deck, which again, that round shared a lane with Dark Dimension. We lost against a Wong deck and a high evolutionary deck as well. The non-favorable location number 3 was Danger Room. This one was really surprising here, guys, because you would think Destroy Mechanics was going to go super well. It did not. We lost all 4 of the rounds we saw this lane, and this was against a Thanos Control, High Evolutionary, Wong, and Rocks and Hawks. This was a tough one here, guys. Hopefully we don't have to repeat that again. In location number 4, we have Fisk Tower. We only won 1 out of 3 of these. One of them was a Sarah Bounce, which we also lost when Washington, D.C. was in play, and another Control. You guys are going to see Control on a lot of these different locations. Control was a very strong counter to the Galactus deck. Next, we have Washington, D.C. We did not win any rounds with this on the field. Again, we lost with a Sarah Bounce, another Galactus deck, which was interesting. I think on this one they had just beaten us. They got the better draws. We did not. We lost against a Destroy deck, and we lost against a mixed deck as well. Finally, we got to see Eternity Range. We only won 1 out of 4 games here, guys. The first one was a Khazar counter. Now, this one was actually really interesting because Khazar counter was the first deck we played on the R&D series. So make sure you guys go check that out. That'd be super helpful if you did. And then we ran into another 2 control decks on these locations, all separate games. We lost against Control quite a few times. So we were happy to not see any more of those. Very similarly to when we did our Destroy deck in episode number 2 here, guys, there's a lot of different cards that I would see this deck played with, and these all have some really good synergies just depending on how you play them. So these were cards that were not in the deck currently, and so we've got Destroyer, Elektra, Gambit, Nimrod, Wave, Arnim Zola, Negasonic Teenage Warhead, Deathlock, Death, Bucky Barnes, and Deadpool. These are all really good Destroy mechanic cards, but we just didn't quite have room to have all of these in there. Also, special mention to Gambit as well. We played a round with Dark Dimension where somebody had played Wong, Gambit, and then Odin at the end to destroy almost every single card we had on the field after turn 6. That was a huge bummer. I do think they wiped the entire board with us on that one. Some pretty common counters you guys would see. Most of these are all in the control mechanic. One of the biggest ones we saw was Cosmo. This good boy came up many times on the control mechanic, and it just totally killed us. Armor was a tough one to counter just because they had gone through and kind of negated some of our early games, so we weren't able to ramp our power up that much. There was a few rounds as well where I got to play against Mystique, and they would play some pretty good cards beforehand, and that was always a little bit of a tough one. Or they would do a Cosmo Mystique counter, so basically I wouldn't be able to play Galactus, and that really hamstrung me. Rogue was a salty one here, guys. I got beat a few times by a turn 6 Rogue because the only ongoing card I had in my deck that would still be in play on turn 6 was usually Null. And having Rogue steal your Null ability is a buster. That is a hard one to play against. And then obviously, if you don't have turn priority going into turn 6, Shang-Chi was a real killer, especially if they were able to destroy your Null at the end of the game. Finally, guys, we get into our deck rankings. Because we did so very well with this deck, the Galactus 1.3 is going to take us all the way up to that first place spot with 0.67 cubes. That puts Khazar Counter down into second place with 0.41 cubes out of 100 games. And then our Destroy 1.0, guys, is probably going to hold that last place spot at negative 0.24 for the rest of eternity. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys liked the video and you guys would like to see us do even more decks, we are planning to do quite a few more of these. So please make sure you guys like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. If you guys want to support the channel so we can spend even more time going through this and staying up with the meta, you guys can also support us on Patreon as well. Until then, happy snapping, everybody.